Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallama ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. The Quran is full of arguments, but because our eyes aren't trained to spot arguments and conclusions and the logical flow from premises or lines of evidence to conclusions, we miss these arguments. I want to illustrate the presence of arguments in the Quran with a couple of verses from Surah Al-Ma'idah. In these verses, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He addresses the Christians and He says that those who say, surely Allah is the third of three, those who affirm the Trinity, they have surely disbelieved. They have certainly disbelieved who say, surely Allah is the third of three, even though there's no God save the one God. وَمَا مِنْ إِلَهٍ إِلَّا إِلَهٌ وَاحِدٌ. This here is an argument. It's an allusion to an argument. It's saying that even though there's clear evidence that there's only one God and that God is one and that God is not three or multiple, they still say this. And those who say this, despite the fact that there's evidence, they've surely disbelieved in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This argument, it's a very important argument in the Quran. It's something that you will be learning in this training. But let's put this argument aside for a moment. Let's just appreciate that it's being referenced here, and it's referenced in many verses in the Quran. Let's just appreciate that and move on to look at this particular argument that I think will be easier for us to follow. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says that the Messiah, son of Mary, is nothing more than a messenger, like the many other messengers who have passed away before him, and his mother was a great saintly woman. وَأُمُّهُ صِدِّيقَةٌ. I showed you that conclusions and premises, sometimes they are not stated explicitly, but you have to understand them from what's being said. So here, what's being stated here is actually a conclusion. In these verses, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that Jesus and his mother are not God. The Trinity has various kinds of forms amongst various Christian sects today and throughout history. In one of its forms, Jesus was revered as divine and his mother was also revered as divine. And these Christians, a group of them existed at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and these verses are speaking to them, and it's saying that the Messiah, son of Mary, was nothing more than a messenger, like the many other messengers who've died. He's nothing more than that. In other words, he's not God. The most he is a mortal messenger, and the most that his mother is or was is a great saintly woman. They're not God. This is the conclusion of an argument. And this last line here, it gives evidence. It says, they both used to eat food. كَانَا يَأْكُلَانِ الطَّعَامِ. This is evidence for a conclusion. There's an argument that's being made here in this verse. And the evidence is that they both needed food. They're not God because they both needed food. So this is an argument. There's a conclusion and evidence that we understand. Evidence is stated. Conclusion is understood because the rhetorical structure of the verse is saying this is the most they are. In other words, they're not God. And it's mentioned in the larger context of a condemnation of the doctrine of the Trinity. So this is an argument in the Quran. The Quran is making an argument. It's not just saying that you're wrong, don't worship Jesus, don't worship Mary, but it's giving a reason, a rational reason that they can understand so that they can come to their own realization that neither Jesus nor his mother are God. This is an informal argument. We can present it in a formal way, two premises and a conclusion. We can say that what's happening here is that no one who needs anything can be God. This is really important. This is really important. This is the first premise. It's unstated, but it's understood. And if this premise isn't there, the argument is not there. No one who needs anything can be God. This is really important because the argument for the existence of God that you will learn in the second training module, this is what it's all about. So no one who needs anything can be God. So if you understand that argument and you come to see this argument, everything fits together in a beautiful way. All of these rational arguments, they come together. The Quran is a coherent whole. No one who needs anything can be God. The second premise is Jesus and his mother need something. What do they need? They need food, for example. They needed to eat. Therefore, Jesus and his mother are not God. Anyone who accepts the first premise and also accepts the second premise must accept the conclusion that they are not God. And this is the argument that this verse of the Quran is making. There are many, many such arguments throughout the Quran. The Quran makes arguments. The Quran is full of arguments. There's not a single verse in the Quran that tells us not to use our minds, but there are many verses. And we've seen one already that condemn people for not using their minds. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He gave us minds so that we could use them, so that we could evaluate arguments and come to the conclusion that Islam is true. And these are the arguments that we'll be learning in this course. And all of these arguments are in the Quran. And I'll be showing you why that's the case and how that's the case in this training module, in these training modules. Sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.